We're glad to have you back. We'll stay with our running discussions and conversations around the Central Bank of Nigeria as they voted to retain the monetary policy rate at 27.5% following its 300th meeting. That's the MPC meeting which held in Abuja. Well, this was disclosed by the Apex Bank's governor, Olayemi Cardoso, during the post-MPC press briefing on Tuesday. All 12 members voted unanimously to maintain current policy rates, the CBN stated in the speech. Now, the decision demonstrates the community's cautious approach to monetary management as it continues to assess prevailing macroeconomic conditions and effectiveness of recent tightening measures. CBN highlighted the recent moderation in Nigeria's inflation rate, which eased to 23.71% in April from 24.23% in March, according to the latest data from the NBS. Well, let's talk to Mr. Vayala Kwaga, who is the Group Head, Research and Policy Advisory, Open Government Institutional Partnership at Budget. He joins me live via Zoom. It's good to have you on the show. It's been a while, Mr. Kwaga.
Thank you so much, Tolu. Delighted to be here as always.
Yeah, I think I should start with what you think with the outcome of that meeting, considering macroeconomic fundamentals that we face as a country.
Yeah, I mean, it was not expected. I think the good thing about the monetary sector is you can reasonably predict the position of the central bank regarding the macroeconomic fundamentals. And because the central bank has a very tight agenda, a very tight scope, it's not very difficult to prophesy, you know, where the central bank will place its position. I mean, looking at the fact that the central bank is leaning more towards inflation targeting and creating the agenda and creating the position that it is interested in ensuring that rates remain stable, it's not surprising that rates were held. I mean, we are coming from a situation where there was a consecutive raising of rates, I think 6 times since we entered 2025. The second time the rates have been held. So I suspect that this may be forward, looking at the renewed interest of the central bank, you know, in stabilizing inflation.
Inflation targeting. That's what we've seen in recent time. We also saw a rebased CPI that many talked about the components of that rebasing, that's those components that were put into that basket. But if you look at it, what is your understanding of the present kind of inflation that we face in Nigeria? Supply side, demand side inflation, or how does that come to you?
You have the supply side, you have the demand side, you also have imported inflation. But fortunately, there has been some significant involvement of the central bank in exchange rate management, which has seen commendations from, you know, various stakeholders. The rates, I do not think, have had much of a disparity. That's the official rate and the parallel market rate. I don't think the spread has been beyond 400, 500 naira. And that's actually very, very commendable, looking at where we are coming from. And seeing that the central bank is interested in targeting inflation by giving clear signals, I think it's important we dimension just what the central bank can do to rein in inflation. I'll get to the CPI rebasing in just a moment. But I will say that the interventions by the bank, you know, in order to tighten that money supply are key. While you might disagree with the bank's, you know, operations in terms of restricting some form of liquidity through the real sector, merchant banks and deposit money banks, the central bank really does not have much breathing room as regards what it can do. I am of the view that inflation in Nigeria is largely one of, it's largely one of the cyclical policy of the federal government. Now, of course, for the enthusiasts out there, we know that fiscal policy should follow a counter-cyclical position. When the market is expanding, government spending should be a bit less. When the market is contracting, government spending should be a bit more. But the federal government, unfortunately, has been spending more and more over the years, with 2025 having the highest budget Nigeria has ever seen, though quite small compared to 2023 dollar terms. So looking at the rebasing of the consumer price index, we do see a tamping down, at least in terms of absolute size of inflation. We do see an expansion in the total number of goods being measured, bringing in the telecom sector and expanding the total number of goods, to which inflation, the consumer price index is calculated. I think that's great. I think that shows that the economy is growing. However, there needs to be some support to this GDP expansion, to this consumer price measurement. And when you look at the assessments of some stakeholders on the cost of goods, for instance, the cost of agricultural products, the yams, the cereals, you see that the difference between 2024 and 2025, there has been a huge leap, in the absolute value, that's the Naira value now of these goods. Bismarck Rwani did, a very, very interesting set of charts that showed that the cost of yam, the cost of rice, the cost of wheat have actually increased between 2024 and May of 2025. However, the inflation rate month on month, has reduced from, I think, 24% to 23.71 in May of 2025. So yes, the consumer price index expansion has come with a lot of significant changes. For one, we see that there's higher inflation in rural areas, and even in the urban areas, the transportation component seems to be much larger than previously anticipated. And this can even be a guide for policymakers regarding the right form of interventions, they can put in place to ease off this inflationary pressure. But going back to the bank, what we need to see is, I guess, some more intervention regarding the clarity of the rates and the role of private sector credit to the economy. I was going to round up by saying that the M2, broad money is growing at a very, very high rate. And again, like I maintain, I think that is because of government spending, not necessarily lending from the private sector to, not really lending from the commercial banks to the private sector. I think it's a problem of fiscal policy that the executive does really need to consider.
The central bank has also come out firmly to say that there's improved confidence in Nigeria's economy. That is one question that I would like you to answer. What do you make of investors' confidence now, following the IMF spring meetings, all of the conversations there? The CBN governor says there's more of stability and investors seems to be interested in coming in more than before. Do you agree to that?
I mean, I absolutely agree. I think for one, the exchange rate management has been, very, very significant and properly well done. There has been serious stability in the Naira to dollar exchange rates. I would also say that inflation, as far as the bank's position and stance is concerned, there's a clear direction on what the central bank intends to do regarding rate hikes, regarding the cash reserve ratio, regarding the asymmetric corridors, and the liquidity ratio as well. I would also say that looking at investments, there may have been some reduction in foreign direct investments, but some sectors are of the view that foreign portfolio investment is increasing. And, with the president's moves to sort of liberalize the oil and gas regime through executive orders, as we've also seen some investments in offshore deep water components of the upstream at the oil sector. That is an indication that there is some renewed investor confidence. I think what sort of supplement this needs is clearer policy direction in terms of the fiscals on the part of the executive. If we think about the IMF's, position, I think they backtracked on their optimistic gross domestic product numbers, and they dialed it down from 3.4 to about 3%. The federal government is still maintaining that it sees a 3.6. I think a lot of, stakeholders and prominent economists are also of the view that with our external reserves performance, which has moved to 38 billion, and a level of stability in terms of providing to international investors that need it. I mean, there is some very clear indication that this administration, as far as the monetary side is concerned, has a very, very clear position and a very clear stance. And is better management of the economy in terms of the real sector management and even the external sector regarding our external reserves growth. We need to go beyond 38 billion, to much higher figures like during the Obasanjo regime.
What about our currency? After that meeting, we hear that a bit of stability, and that's talking about being appropriately priced. But I've had some discussions with the likes of Bismarck Rwani where he says 1,400 around that should be what our currency should be. But really, considering the stability and that disparity, narrowing down that disparity, do you think that is a step in the right direction? And do you also think that Naira is now getting as competitive as it used to be?
So I think that we need to remember currency can be commodities. I mean, it is in many ways a commodity. But where you want to ensure that your currency is strong, you need to ensure that what it is being measured against, your formulation of that measurement is very clear. There's a clear line of sight between improving exports and the value addition of Nigerian goods and their competitiveness on the international markets. The president is clear, President Tinubu is clear that he wants to improve, Nigeria's export earnings. And there have been several interventions by customs, by the Ministry of Trade and Industry to improve, that at least at the ports and discharge of cargo going to overseas. But it needs to go beyond agricultural goods, because those are low value goods that have very minimal value add. I saw a story not too long ago of cocoa farmers that were celebrating how much money they were earning from selling cocoa. And it was, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. And, that's great. But imagine if there could be a process, some value addition to processing that cocoa into some semi-finished, good to be exported further. That would at least show the international market that we have something, wonderful for you to buy at a higher price. The same goes for, the mines and steel sector. Imagine a situation where there is value addition from the raw materials produced in Nigeria. And then that goes to the fiscal management, because all of this cannot happen without a local environment that supports this value addition. We're talking about credit, we're talking about energy, we're talking about, a proper logistical framework, roads and telecommunications. So for the president to actually ensure that export is improved and value addition is improved, he must have conversations with the state governors regarding the quality of electricity generation. It is a shame that California, one state in the United States, produces more electricity than Nigeria may have ever produced, So the executive at the federal level and state executives need to have a conversation about electricity generation. There needs to be a conversation around road infrastructure and rail lines to ensure that when these goods are produced, they can get to the ports as fast as possible. There needs to be a further conversation around the creation of additional ports, in the Gulf of Guinea, along Nigeria's shore, that can coincide with improved road networks and rail networks, in the country. So you can move your goods, for instance, from Borno or from Benue down to Calabar and have them exported, right from ports in Calabar. Or you can move your goods from Kogi in the north central down to a port in Oyo State, for instance. These are things, these are very simple things that the state governments and the federal government need to have serious conversations around to improve export earnings in foreign currency and thereby reduce the pressure on the Naira. Because we all know, JP Morgan recently said that they project oil prices to remain around $66 for 2025. and fall even further in 2026 to around $58. Donald Trump has been going around, seeing how he can reduce the price of oil. Of course, he's trying to tamp down inflation in the United States. And if, these preliminary conversations around talks with Iran, we may see very low in oil prices, and that's very dangerous territory. So we must ramp up our non-oil sector. We must run, much better in terms of foreign exchange and, strengthen the naira in the process.
Interesting conversation, as always. But you've touched on Donald Trump. Let's take a step to look at global trade and, of course, the tariff issues and how that might affect us moving forward. Well, what are you learning around that?
So, there was a lot of fear and concern regarding Trump's initial announcements in early April, and his characteristic style of being bombastic and very, very sensational was actually contrasted with a backtracking with many countries, China inclusive, regarding the tariffs he intended to put up. As a matter of fact, even when he did come out in April with the over 100% tariffs, he had already, excused the semiconductor chip metals and, and all that for China. So, for China and the US, I suspect there will be some further conversations about rate drops. For Nigeria, the fear wasn't really that much because our largest commodity with the US was even oil. And, that, I think there was just a 14% tariff, if I'm not mistaken. But, by and large, Nigeria needs to have a rethink around its biggest trading partners, many of which are in Western Europe, India and the United States. What can we produce in the medium term that can bring about some improvements in the value of our currency? But if that is too much of a challenge, perhaps we need to look inward. Operationalization of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement leaves a massive market for Nigerian goods within the continent. And I would love to see between Nigeria and countries on the continent, in the line of semi-finished or semi-processed goods that perhaps can be shipped, at much less cost, to these African countries. Let the Naira also explore those other markets, and bring about some value add in the domestic manufacturing sector in the process.
Finally, before I let you go, we see major central banks also around the world. Some are cutting rates. I remember the Fed actually held on rates of the last meeting. That's after the back and forth with President Donald Trump. You remember what happened between Jerome Powell and President Trump the last time before he held on rates and all of that. But I would ask you that moving forward, do you see the CBN still maintaining this stance of holding rates? Considering the larger economy, I would still say that, because the real sector, the guys playing in the manufacturing and all of that space, will tell you getting credit is really on the high side. And that is really worrisome if you want to grow an economy.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The organized private sector, I think just 2 days after the announcement by the central bank governor, did say that, this has to stop. And this is really affecting the market. When you look at, the cash reserve ratio at 50%, you look at the liquidity ratio at 30%, that leaves very little, in terms of credit to the private sector. And that is true because studies have shown, statistical data shows that the 3 single highest challenges and constraints to businesses, not even the large businesses, even the SMEs, is access to credit. And when you provide a CRR of 50%, you have effectively shut out, 50% of accessible funds. When you keep the rate, at double digits in the 20s, it's really going to discourage a lot of businesses. But I think the federal government fiscal policy needs to step in, and through, improving energy provision and logistics framework, can actually ease pressure on the cost of doing business. And this is a conversation that needs to be had with the state governors. Imagine a Nigeria where energy costs are 1/3 of what they are today. Imagine a Nigeria where it's easy and simple and fast and safe to move your goods from the north central to the southwest or to the southeast or to the south-south. I mean, that would bring down a lot of strain on the existing credits that, the manufacturing industry and MSMEs are even trying to access. So, there are many entry points for ensuring that these constraints to business reduce. But I will, round up by saying I do see a retaining of rates, in the next meeting. If the rates will not be retained, I think they might be relaxed very slightly. I don't see the asymmetric corridor going below maybe 300 / maybe 150 at the very most in terms of the asymmetric corridor. In terms of the cash reserve ratio, I don't see it going below 45% at the very most. I don't see the liquidity ratio changing either. So, but this has to be done within the context of understanding that inflation in Nigeria, in my estimation and going by the available evidence, is more of a fiscal phenomenon. There is a lot of money coming from government spending that is not being balanced by the creation of value in the real sector. I think I'll stop there.
Viola Kwaga, Group Head Research and Policy Advisory, Open Government and Institutional Partnership at Budget. Thank you so much for your time. I know you have to head back to your retreat. Let me allow you get back to that. I'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Do enjoy your weekend. All right, then, interesting conversation always with Viola Kwaga, breaking it down. I'll hold him down to his projections for the next MPC meeting. But it's time to review